is a really important part of a Burns night. It's normally a speech for 10 minutes or so that talks about Robert Burns' life, his works, and his legacy. And it takes place after everyone's quite merry, full of haggis, full of whiskey, so hopefully you're getting there. I was born in Dumfries. This is where Burns spent the last few years of his life. He's buried there. I attended many Burns suppers as a kid in my adult life as well. From the age of 5, you start reciting Burns' poetry in school in Scotland. You heard the address to the haggis before. On my grandfather's headstone is the line, "I've been the more you take your place, above everyone else you take your place." So we put down his headstone to honour his love of Robert Burns. So he has a very special place in my heart, and I'm happy to talk here tonight. I'm a proud Scot, and I'm happy to see that the National Bard of Scotland, Robert Burns, pioneer of the Romantic movement, is being celebrated in different parts of the world. You can find the Burns Supper in every continent in the world. Most people would say that the Scots would stereotypically drink whiskey and wear kilts and eat haggis and play bagpipes in party lots. They would be right. I am wearing the Johnston tartan tonight. The Johnston clan goes back about 700 years. We are from the borders of Scotland. It's said that if we're not fighting the English, we're fighting other clans. And if we're not fighting other clans, we're fighting ourselves. Whiskey forms an integral part of any Burns night. I used to work in a whiskey distillery, so I'm happy to talk about whiskey with anyone tonight. It's funny hearing people talk about Scotch. We just call it whiskey. Burns suppers have grew now to be a wider reflection of all things Scottish. It's up there with St Andrew's Day. They can be very formal or just a celebration of a great poet with friends and a few drams. Haggis is very important to us. You like the haggis? Yeah. So Burns wrote a prayer for this haggis, he wrote a poem for this haggis, so it's exciting stuff. Until you learn what's in it. After the supper, if you've ever ate a chicken nugget or anything else like that, you've had far worse than that. That's the dying truth. After a Burns supper, you can expect anything from more poetry to songs to a full-on ceilidh dance, which is even better if everyone's drunk. The relationship of Virginia and Scotland goes back a long way, in fact, millions of years. We are at the foot of the Appalachian Mountains tonight, and millions of years ago these actually connected to another landmass which is now called the Highlands of Scotland. So there's a big connection there, and in more recent history you can find the towns of Dumfries and Annandale in Virginia. I was born in Dumfries, as I said, and I grew up in the area of Annandale, so there's a strong connection with Virginia. So where I'm from, and in Burns, there's lots of connections to Burns around there. To give you more of a sense of this area, just to the east of where I'm from, the bicycle was invented. And to the west of where I'm from, a guy called John Paul Jones got into sailing as a child, and he went on to found the US Navy. So there's a strong connection between Virginia and Scotland. Burns was born in Alloway in Ayrshire in 1759. He worked on a farm. He was from a big family. His family were quite poor, but his family really valued education, so they got him a tutor. And this helped him develop his love of language and poetry. He first laid eyes on a girl he really liked on his farm when he was 15 years old. And he wrote, "Oh, once I loved a bonny lass," and he went from there. His poems are written in the Scots language. So in Scotland there's 3 national languages, everyone speaks English, about 1 million people speak Scots, the language of Burns, and only 1% of the population speak Gaelic. After publishing his first book of poems to great success, he moved around Scotland to places called Mauchline, Tarbolton, and then our capital, Edinburgh. And at this point, he was almost a celebrity at his time. He married Green Armour in 1788, which I noticed is the year that this town became a charter, to give you a sense of the timeline. Burns wrote of the lassies, "A woman can make an average man great, and a great man average." As money was starting to run out for Robert Burns, he liked a good time, hard to relate to, and his family started to grow. Burns had to turn to new employment to keep afloat. He became a tax collector, and he moved to the south of Scotland to carry out his duties. At this time it's important to get a sense of the history and the time in which he lived. Burns lived through the American and the French Revolution. The union with England and Scotland was still in its infancy. Burns became critical of this union, and he was indeed sympathetic to revolutionaries. However, his employment was with the British Crown, and he wanted to look after his family. So in his later years, he can be described as writing increasingly complex muses of his time. He was always something of a rebel. At this time, Burns moved to Dumfries, the town where I was born. Some of his most famous works include To a Mouse, Tam O'Shanter, Auld Lang Syne, A Fond Kiss, A Man's a Man for All That. He even wrote an ode to George Washington and a poem about toothache. He gave us the line, the power that the gift would give us to see ourselves as others see us. He was a deeply reflective individual on the human condition. I could, of course, quote in Scots for you, "We slicket cuan timorous beastie," but it might not make much sense. In his pub, which you can visit in Dumfries, there is a chair, Burns' chair, and if anybody comes in and happens upon that chair and takes a seat, you have to recite some Burns poetry, and if you don't, you have to buy everyone in the room a drink. They're very, very serious about that rule, so just know that if you go to Dumfries one day. Burns died at the age of 37, a young man, but he made a big impact in that time. He developed a fever, he went to see a doctor. The doctor said you should go and bathe in this well over here, it's full of, you know, great powers and healing stuff, and then he died 3 days later. The year after that, on the anniversary of his death, some of his friends got together and decided to recite some of his poetry, have a meal, drink some whiskey, and that was very successful. And then the following year they thought, maybe we should do it on his birthday, which is a bit happier than the day he died. So it went from there. Finally, Robert Burns has left a big legacy, which still carries through to this day. A few facts about Robert Burns. Every year I learn something different and interesting about Robert Burns' legacy in the world, and the more you travel, the more you'll realise that. Auld Lang Syne is the second best known song in the English language after Happy Birthday. The poem Tam O'Shanter inspired Michael Jackson's Thriller, the greatest selling album of all time. John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, the title from that came from a Burns poem. It said that Abraham Lincoln could recite most of Burns' poetry from memory. Burns inspired people ranging from Martin Luther King to Beethoven to Bob Dylan. There are more statues of Burns around the world than any other non-religious figure. There are Burns suppers in every continent in the world. You can find Burns on the stamps in Russia, and he was the first person to appear on a bottle of Coke. After the first real person, I think Santa was on there. His poetry has been taken to space. A crater on Mercury is named after him. And if you're crossing a road in Japan, you can do that to the sound of one of Robbie Burns' songs. For these reasons and many more, in Scotland you can find him on our banknotes. He was voted the greatest ever Scot, and he's very much in our hearts. So, if you can charge your glasses, raise them to Robbie Burns.
To Robbie Burns!
Thank you. Wow.